Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, Greg Anthony here, and let's get started on this January 3rd, 2017 day on our calendar. And you're listening to the Investigative Journal again here for another year. And let me tell you, today I always start out with a Jesuit quote. So let me give you the quote. Jesuits create all wars. And guess who said that? I did. I'm going to give you my quote because today we were going to talk about, first, I want to spend about 10 minutes talking about Father Paolo Oglio, O-G-L-I-O. And the reason I want to do that is because I believe he's the father of ISIS. And I said a long time ago that ISIS was created by the CIA and all of these secret organizations along with Jesuit influence. They are the masterminds behind all this. And I think people have a hard time catching on to it. So I thought I'd give you a perfect example of what I'm talking about. And no better than this priest. And let's just start out here by saying that Father Dell'Oglio, is an Italian Jesuit priest, and he lived in Syria. He was called the priest of the revolution, enthusiastically condemning the Syrian government, calling on the United Nations and the West to intervene militarily in support of Islamist rebels. Yes, Dell'Oglio was expelled from the country in June of 2012 after decades of monastic life in Syria for supporting Islamic rebels against the Syrian government. He was the Jesuit connection, folks. And let me explain this a little more. Remember I talked about how Stalin was connected to a Jesuit, Father Edmund Walsh, and this story never gets out. And Father Edmund Walsh was the founder of the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, where most of our diplomats are trained. Jesuit trained, by the way. And none of this stuff gets out in the media. Now, if you go to Dwight D. Eisenhower's website, you'll find a page memorializing Father Walsh. Now, I said a long time ago, when I called Georgetown, they said, Father Walsh is a great educator. Well, yeah, he's an educator, but how many great educators are there in the world, and how many get put on a presidential website? Well, if you trace his history, he was sent to many places. He was sent to Iraq and all these other places. And when he went to Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution, he was said to go there as a man representing the Vatican, bringing money, bringing aid to the starving people, bringing food to the starving people in Russia. When in fact he went with a blank check, and he made sure that the Bolshevik Revolution was funded by the West. And guess what? Another deal was this: if you want this money, Mr. Lenin, you're going to have to let Stalin into the highest levels of the Bolshevik Revolution, which happened and ended up Stalin then kills Lenin, and they get their way. Stalin, of course, was Jesuit trained as well, just like most dictators during that period of time, Mussolini, Hitler, etc., Franco. So the Vatican works both sides. The Jesuits work both sides of the fence here. And so when you look at Father Edmund Walsh and what he was doing, wow, it's not a leap to say, well, what's this Jesuit priest doing in Syria all this time? And why is he supporting the rebels, the Islamic rebels, when in fact this group morphed into ISIS, and the money and the connections were coming from the West, coming from the Clinton and her nefarious activities as Secretary of State in the Obama administration. All of this was going on back then. So when I look at Edmund Walsh, I see the same thing occurring here. Now, ISIS is a creation of our government, our CIA, the Jesuits, creating these wars and working both sides of them. Now, many of you will say, well, Greg, that's a leap. Not many people really get that, and I get criticized still to this day. Well, listen, I've been doing research for over 25 years on this, and let me tell you how I got started on it. When I was working in Rome at the Rome newspaper, something very strange happened. Well, I've told you this story before, but I learned firsthand what they were doing with terrorism in Italy back in the 80s. During that time I was there were terrorist attacks all over the place. And there were these terrorist groups called the Brigata Rossa and other extremist groups. And I always wondered, where'd they come from? Now, in Italy, during that time, you remember the Bologna bombing. There were attacks, there were bombs going off at American schools and at American bookshops. And I, at that particular juncture in my life, didn't quite understand it. I thought there were these extremist groups. So, because I worked for the mainstream media back then and was just getting my feet wet and understanding what the Vatican was all about. So one day I went to work at the American newspaper, and I was about 10 seconds away from being killed. A bomb went off. Me and this other guy were in the building early in the morning, and I've told the story a number of times. And you can check it out if you don't believe me. Just go to American newspaper bombed in Rome, 1982, UPI, the United Press International, and that story is still on the web, and you'll see my name there. And so I was almost killed in a bombing, and that made me start wondering, why did this occur? How could they get in this building? And it occurred 10 days before Ronald Reagan was making his trip to Rome. Okay, first trip to Rome. So about 2 hours after the incident, guess what happens? Some right-wing or left-wing extremist group says, "We, death to Reagan and all the imperialists." And so I said to myself, how did they get in there? The bomb was placed in the publisher's office right near the hallway where I walked. I took a left down into the newsroom, and boom, the explosion goes off. So I started wondering about it, and I started looking into it since my life was almost taken. And to make a long story short, my whole life began to become disillusioned. I found out that stark, great evidence that the CIA funded the American newspaper. I also started looking into how these terrorist organizations were being funded. Found out that there was many of these CIA agents rolling around Rome. And guess what? They were orchestrating these terrorist groups just like they're doing today. And then I found some Jesuit involvement there. You can't help but find out certain things when you're right there in Rome. Now, I could never get any of this published or even prove it. Because back then, if you go with a story to UPI or anywhere there, it never sees the light of day if it has anything to do negatively on the Vatican. Especially when you start talking about, here's a good example. The biggest scandal in the world was going on there, and very little got here to America. But all over the French papers, all over the Italian papers were covering it. But Americans got very little of those scandals that went deep, deep, deep into the money laundering, the connections to the mob, the connections to terrorism, the connection between the Masonic lodges and all these cardinals who were members. The names were coming out. And even the death of Pope John Paul I, he was only in office for 33 days, was very suspect. And he was murdered for things that we've talked about on this show, and I don't want to spend the whole show talking about it. So when I tell you that there's a connection between Del Oglio and ISIS, he's called the father of ISIS. That's what he should be called. Now, he was spent years to charm ISIS into being. In an interview with him conducted by Syria Deeply, reveals much of his Jesuit agenda and his Jesuit role in the ISIS formation. 19 days after the interview, the media reported him kidnapped by ISIS in Syria, with unconfirmed reports that he was executed by ISIS. Now, let me start reading some of this stuff that I put together, and you'll find out that that was a hoax. He never was killed because he turned up later. So Del Oglio was expelled from the country. Now, this is going back to 2012, after decades of monastic life in Syria, for supporting Islamic rebels against the Syrian government. So Assad gets him out, but he comes back. Now, look, Assad works with them as well. Otherwise, he'd have never been allowed to come back or allowed to do this. So here we go. So Assad works with the Jesuits as well. And here we have Del Oglio. 6 months after being expelled by the Syrian government in June 2012, Paolo Del Oglio was awarded the Peace Prize of the Italian region of Lombardy. Now, when you start looking, he gets the Peace Prize for starting ISIS. Del Oglio did not stop his Jesuit intrigue there, though. He frequently snuck back into Syria to help the rebels who formed ISIS in April 2013. With Del Oglio, international aids from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the UK, and the US combined. He's getting money from all these places to form the very group that's going to come here and terrorize America. And whether they're false flags or not, I don't care, because 99% of the American people believe they're real. And let me tell you something. I did too in 1982 when I was almost killed, but they're not. They're orchestrated. 3 months after ISIS was formed, the Jesuit-controlled media told us that Del Oglio was kidnapped and executed on July 29, 2013 by his own baby ISIS in Syria, 19 days after the interview with Syria Deeply that I just mentioned. So now this propaganda comes out. How do you think he was allowed there? Don't think Assad works together with our leaders? The following, I'm going to give you some excerpts from the interview of Paolo Del Oglio by the Syria Deeply on July 10th, 2013. Okay, the voice translating this is kind of weird, but bear with it and get the content. Here we go.
You met with militarized extremists who oppose the Assad regime.
Yes. The Syrian state news agency then accused me of being embedded with Islamist extremists and paid by Al-Qaeda.
Your mission has clearly expanded far beyond furthering Islamic Christian understanding.
I am fully engaged in Islamic Christian harmony building, but today I'm also in the service of Islamic harmony building. We want next Ramadan to be a time for prayer and action for the reconciliation between Sunnis and Shiites.
Are the types of causes you've taken up typical of a Jesuit?
The Jesuits are an order of priests committed to the service of the gospel and souls, but not in an artificial way. We are very much for engaging and compromising in the society, by fighting for justice, for community development and human development, and for interreligious dialogue and harmony building. Such has been my commitment, and in this time.
Have you ever heard a pile of garbage more than that, if you really understand what the Jesuits are about? He wasn't there to do those things. He was there to make sure that ISIS was formed. They got the money, they got the weapons, and now you understand why the American policy, Obama's policy and Clinton's policy, was to basically turn Syria into a killing field, where over 500,000 Syrians have been killed. Aleppo looks like Nazi Germany after the invasion. And Del Oglio's, they're making sure that ISIS grows. And now they're claiming attacks all over the world. And it's amazing. Okay, let's go back to the interview.
You were exiled soon after the massacre of Hola. Was that a turning point in the conflict for you?
Yes, in the sense that it was the moment when my calls to the international community to act in a non-violent way to protect the freedom of the Syrian people in their pacifist protest ended in a failure, where the international community was unable to act. The regime chose to use more and more violent repression, until it reached the point of massacre.
At that point you decided a violent response to this repression was justified?
The moment came when I said people have the right to defend themselves. The soldiers that have left the army so that they won't be forced to shoot their own people, they have the right and the duty to protect the people. And when a democratic civil society is pleading not to be destroyed by violent repression and torture, the international community should help.
Then, as usual, Jesuits controlled the media, putting the blame squarely on Israel and the United States for all the ISIS bloodshed.
Yes, and we're going to continue here in a minute. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so now the Jesuits are giving you the spin that you're getting on the mainstream. And a member of the Roman Catholic Society of Jesus, founded by Ignatius Loyola in 1534 and devoted to missionary work. That's what they tell you. But they're given to intrigue. And they're given to all of these creations of wars. That's the truth behind all of their nonsense that they tell us. It's amazing. And people buy it hook, line, and sinker. Now, one thing you have to remember is that, remember they said Del Oglio was killed? And then later they find out he's still alive and well, and the story goes on. So anyway, the father of ISIS, Father Del Oglio. Okay, remember my Jesuit quote at the beginning of the show, all wars are created by Jesuits? Well, listen, I found someone who said the same thing. It's a little clip called Emancipated by Truth, and I thought I'd play that for you here on the Investigative Journal. It's about a 14-minute clip. We'll get about half of it, and then we'll hit it on the other side of the break. Here we go.
I am in an area in the east of London called Stratford, and behind me is a plaque of a poet by the name of Gerald Manley Hopkins, but he was also a Jesuit priest. But on it, if you carefully read it, it says, "Loath for a love men knew in them, banned by the land of their birth. Rhine refused them, Thames would ruin them, surf, snow, river, and earth gnashed, but thou art above, thou Orion of light." Who are these men called the Society of Jesus or the Jesuits? We'll find out in this study.
And in Matthew it says, "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars." Matthew 24:6.
Spanish priest Friar Adolfo Nicolas is in control of one of the largest and least known militias on earth. He succeeded Dutch priest Peter Hans Kolvenbach as the Jesuit, sometimes referred to as the Black Pope. The word Jesuits can be found in the Bible. It was a derogatory name given to this priestly militia by 16th century Protestants. According to a former Italian priest, Luigi de Sanctis, the fundamental maxim of the Jesuits is exposed in the exercise of St. Ignatius. All means are good provided they lead to the end. Irish-American Jesuit Dan Lyons in his biography gives us an insight into who the Jesuits are and how they operate. The Society of Jesus was founded by soldiers. St. Ignatius organized it along the lines of an army, hence a military unit company. we are often referred to as the shock troops of Rome. It is traditional for us to seek maximum influence, and that often means working behind the scenes. In 1610, French Jesuit Alexander de Rose colonized Vietnam from France, where it became a French colony until they were booted out. Catholic President Diem was installed to continue to control that region for the papacy, and the United States, whose foreign policy of anti-communism was identical to the papacy's, were used as instruments to crush communism in Indochina. And the usual Hollywood propaganda was used to justify the war that the United States and the papacy shamefully lost, where sadly, the Vietnamese culture has still not fully recovered from this war till this very day. When Buddhist monks protested against this horrific onslaught, and when President Nixon visited Vietnam, who counseled him to bomb this predominantly Buddhist present culture? In 1966, Richard M. Nixon, then a man of no official capacity, spent a few hours talking to Farrell Lyons, a native of Seattle, and a widely-known priest journalist from both were in Taipei. Haiphong Harbor should be closed by a mine, and the Jesuit priest told the future president that's precisely what Mr. Nixon did in the spring of 1972.
Let's go inside the Vatican.
In 2011, a film trailer was released called We Have a Pope, a comedy on the election of a new pope. Was it just Italian satire, or was it preparing the world for the resignation of one pope and the installation of a brand new pope? There is nothing wrong with speculation. The cardinals are adorned in bright red, the prophetic color of the papacy in the apocalypse. But what is very interesting is the striking similarities between the pope in the film and the elected Pope Francis I. The excellent PR of the papacy has presented him as a people's person who cooks his own food and takes the bus like a commoner, and most of the world press have already praised him. But there is a very dark, unrepentant chapter of his life that won't die that easily, that time and most of the corporate-controlled Western media have glossed over. His role in the 1970s dirty war in Argentina. A human rights lawyer accused him of war crimes as documented in the LA Times of April 1st, 2005. But this has been sadly overlooked. 30,000 people were killed in a dark episode of Argentine history, and recently classified documents shows the United States gave full backing of that coup. A Catholic priest, Christian von Wernich, has already been jailed for his complicity of the murders, as well as the president of Argentina, Jorge Rafael Fidela. But who is the man in the top left who was given him mass? It was the highest-ranking Jesuit provincial in Argentina, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the current and newly elected pope. In both the Vietnam and Argentine wars, the Jesuits have only intensified the conflict. Pope Francis I's coat of arms bears the Jesuit symbol, IHS. The mind behind the Jesuits was the Spanish-Basque soldier Don Inigo de Recalde, who founded the Jesuits. After being wounded in a war, he had an hallucinatory mystical experience, and he Latinized his name from Inigo to Ignatius, which means to ignite.
Okay, I think it's good to go over some of this stuff. A lot of times on my show, I've done this for so long that I forget sometimes to go back and discuss Ignatius Loyola and the roots of all of this. And it's a mistake, so I'd like to, I hope you understand, because there are people that come to this show that don't have the background that a lot of my steady listeners do, so we have to take that into account. Okay, we'll be back in the second half hour on the Investigative Journal with more on how Jesuits create all wars.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal on this January 3rd, 2017 day on our calendar, and we're going over my quote of the day, and that's "All wars are Jesuit created." And I'm calling on a little clip by Emancipated by Truth, someone who agrees with me on this, and I found an interesting interview going way back with an esteemed radio host or television host, and Alfred Hitchcock. You know who Alfred Hitchcock is. Well, listen what he has to say regarding the Jesuits.
You and I have very little in common, but we have one thing. We have some Jesuit training in our background.
Oh, no. But I would say that the Jesuit training, I believe, gives you a sort of clarity of mind, a reasoning power, which you don't realize it while you're being taught as a young boy, but that's what they're doing to you.
And you shall hear of rumors of war, Matthew 24:6.
In 1973, Jesuit tactics were used in a film that was nothing more than the promotion of the Jesuit order, the Exorcist. The most feared deity of ancient Babylon, Pazuzu, was a demon that was possessing this young girl in this film. Based upon the true account of a Jesuit priest, the film makes God look weak and powerless, but the Catholic Church strong and majestic. Where an actual Jesuit priest, William O'Malley, stars in the film. The writer and producer of The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty, was educated by the Jesuits in Georgetown. Modern cinema is modeled upon Alfred Hitchcock, but its style can be traced back to the magic lantern of the 1400s, where a 17th century German Jesuit priest, Athanasius Kircher, revolutionized this invention to an occultic art form to lure people away from the Bible back into the fear of Jesuitized Catholicism. He is also the father of broadcasting with his megaphone. So why do few people know about the Jesuits, and what impact do they have on the world today? Jesuitism is an impenetrable mystery to 99 out of 100 of the Jesuits themselves. Russian mystic Madame Blavatsky had access to their own writings and quotes from them. The order has secret signs and passwords according to the degrees to which the members belong, and as they wear no particular dress, it is very difficult to recognize them unless they reveal themselves as members of the order. There is also a secret class known only to the general and a few faithful Jesuits, which perhaps more than any other contributed to the dreaded and mysterious power of the order, says Niccolini.
Did you hear that, what he was saying regarding they don't wear a particular dress or clothing, so it's really hard to tell who they are. They're in every aspect of our society, folks, every aspect. Remember Tupper Saucy, the author of Rulers of Evil? When he was falsely charged for IRS charges, and he found out that the prosecutor was actually a Jesuit priest, and this spurred him on to do more research about the Jesuits and regarding wars. If I told you there's a good possibility, or almost a 100% probability, that Jesuit General Lorenzo Ricci was behind the American Revolution, and many of the founding fathers should be called Jesuit priests because they're following this kind of, we don't know anything about their influence in creating this war, the Revolutionary War, and the reasons they wanted the United States here. These things never get covered anywhere. That's why the media, folks, that's why when you go to the alternative media, you don't get everything. You're getting little bits and pieces. But the problem is in the mainstream media, these broadcasters, whether it's on the left and CNN or on the right with Fox, they all do not even touch this story with a 10-foot pole, and you know it's Jesuit controlled. So let's get back.
The Jesuits operate in a world that few people can see, and that is why they are so successful at what they do. In 1773, when the Jesuits were abolished under its head Lorenzo Ricci, Adam Weishaupt, a Jesuit professor of canon law, continued something that the Jesuits had achieved for almost 2 centuries: infiltration. On this Catholic church in East London, you can see a pentagram. But in Freemasons' Hall in Covent Garden in London, the headquarters of the United Grand Lodge of Masons in England, you can also find the pentagram. Freemasonry is seen as the most secret of the secret societies. But what is Catholic Jesuitized symbols such as the IHS doing in Masonic lodges? Jesuits you can see in this picture with the skull and bones. Later Freemasons also have the skull and bones. The double-headed eagle of the Holy Roman Empire can also be seen among the higher degrees of Freemasonry. And the famous evil eye of ancient Babylon and Egypt can also be found on the apron of Masons. In a book approved by the Jesuits, it says, in 1902, the Masonic historian J.G. Findle wrote that the Jesuits had succeeded in all parts of the globe in creating strife and confusion among Freemasons by tampering with the rituals and by the introduction of higher degrees. When European scientists attempted to recreate the so-called Big Bang Theory in 2008, it was highlighted in the film Angels and Demons. But what is generally overlooked is, who actually created the Big Bang Theory? The Big Bang Theory was first described, but not so much named, by the French Jesuit Georges Lemaitre in the late 1920s. His picture of the universe expanding from a single point was certainly controversial, but has now become scientific orthodoxy. The scientific community that actually praises itself on its secularization believes in the Big Bang Theory, scientific speculation that has still never been proven, which shows that Jesuit scientific philosophy dominates the direction of modern science, where the top Jesuit science astronomers are Darwinists, who try to merge the secular and the sacred, which is called theistic evolution, for Jesuitism is founded not on the Bible, but upon the teachings of Aristotle, where the Jesuits' ratio superior still impacts secular education today. It should not be overlooked that the advantages as well as the disadvantages of our humanist classical education are for the most part attributable to that pedagogic activity which at one time was spread by the Society of Jesus all over the world. The Jesuit president of Boston College, William Lachey, caused controversy when he welcomed warmonger Condoleezza Rice to Boston College, but this is not the first. The Dutch Protestant prince, William the Silent, was killed by the Jesuit assassin, Balthazar Gerard. The French Catholic monarch Henry III, as well as his cousin and successor, Protestant King Henry IV, were both killed by Jesuit assassins, as well as Italian economist Pellegrino Rossi. Why this fascination with murder? Blavatsky tells us why. The Jesuits reckoned it among the greatest achievements of the order that Loyola supported by a special memorial to the Pope a petition for the reorganization of the abominable and abhorrent instrument of wholesale butchery, the infamous tribunal of the Inquisition. The Jesuits took over the Inquisition from the Dominicans, and while many people think it is long gone, the London Guardian of 2006 tells us that the Inquisition formally ended only 40 years ago. In that same year, a Dominican, Joseph Augustin de Noy, said that the Inquisition was justified. That it means all these horrific instruments that bring the most excruciating pain, as well as torture, secret courts, military tribunals, and no trial by jury are just. When Benedict XVI visited Brazil, he praised the history of Catholicism, but he was blasted by the late Venezuelan president, Hugo Chavez, for the horrors of the Latin American Holocaust that was imposed upon them. But the Catholic Church, to justify its horrors, made the film Apocalypto, which shows the natives of Latin America as complete savages who were saved by the Catholic Church. But there is one country, despite its own colonial horrors, that has put up the strongest resistance to the Papal Inquisition, and the British Supreme Court has a monument of King John and the Magna Carta as a memorial to this. What is the Magna Carta? The best authority on this is the Protestant historian J.A. Wiley. The great principle conceded so early as the days of King John and Magna Carta, after confirmed in the reign of Charles II in the famous Act of Habeas Corpus, and held by all statesmen who have flourished since to be one of the main foundations of British liberty, namely the inviolability of the subject saved by the authority of law. There are other monuments in places like Runnymede, in the south of England, near the River Thames, where the Magna Carta was actually signed as a memorial to this resistance. There are also memorials in places like Bury St. Edmunds, in the east of Anglia, that records the famous Magna Carta and the hundreds of knights and the 25 names of the barons that stood up to the Pope and pressured England's king to sign this charter. King John did not want to give in to the authority of the Pope, but when Innocent III, the godfather of the Inquisition, who eventually condemned the Magna Carta, threatened him, he gave in and handed his crown to the Pope's ambassador to England. But the English were not having it, and on the 12th of June 1215, he signed the Magna Carta, which English jurist Edward Coke adopted into English common law. The Puritans and Founding Fathers in the colonies of the United States also adopted it into their constitution, which is now coming under question. Section 39 of the Magna Carta reads, "No free man shall be seized or imprisoned or stripped of his rights or possessions or outlawed or exiled or deprived of his standing in any other way, nor will he proceed with force against him or send others to do so except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land." But we're now seeing that secular politicians and judges on the back of the war on terror are trying to stealthily incorporate the principles of the Inquisition in the British system. Even EU laws are undermining the authority of the Magna Carta, aligning itself with the threats of Pope Innocent III by sounding almost identical to Roman Catholic canon law. A person accused in a penal case can, even though absent, be brought to trial before the tribunal of the place in which the offence was committed. Accusing a person of a crime before it is committed is also from the Inquisition, which is displayed in the trailer of this post 9/11 film, Minority Report.
Positive for Howard Marks. Mr. Marks, by mandate of the District of Columbia Pre-Crime Division, I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks. I'll do it to take place today, April 22nd, at 0800 hours.
Where does the torture method of waterboarding actually come from to extract the information from a suspect? It is from the Papal Inquisition, as as well as methods like spying on your neighbors and the United States Patriot Act, which the last United States President George Bush Jr. incorporated into U.S. law. He also incorporated secret prisons and told the spying agency, the NSA, to spy on phone conversations of United States citizens. That was acted out in a film that did the exact same thing in 2008, The Dark Knight. With constant terror laws being passed threatening freedoms, President Obama continues the Inquisition with glorifying the use of torture in Catherine Bigelow's film Zero Dark 30. While many may laugh and mock and think that the Jesuit agenda is outdated, the last Superior General of the Jesuit, Peter Hans Kolbeck, in 2003 tells us they're objecting. The efforts of the Jesuits to bring Britain back to the Catholic faith have been praised by the leader of the order. But is not Britain a Protestant nation with a secular culture? What exactly do they mean by that? The Battle of Hastings, Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and the Magna Carta are among studies that will no longer be compulsory in a revised curriculum to be sent to schools. They could learn how Henry VIII was dressed, but nothing about the Reformation. Oxford Don John Wycliffe started the European Reformation in the 14th century to restore a superstitious age back to the true knowledge of God. In the Battle of Hastings in 1066, William conquered Britain for Rome. But during the Reformation, Henry VIII separated Britain from Rome. Britain's unsung hero, William Tyndale, continued from Wycliffe in the 16th century the translation of the Bible, which was completed in the 1611 King James Version, which even English Catholics have benefited from. The Reformation gave us true science, divine philosophy, the media, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, the right of society to govern itself according to justice and equity, educating the masses, public libraries, religious and civil liberty to protect us from ecclesiastical tyranny. But all these freedoms are slowly being eroded and undermined. In the 13th century, Catholic German Bishop Eberhard II called the Pope the Antichrist and Babylon. 3 centuries later, Martin Luther did the same thing. Why do they call the Pope the Antichrist? In the Pope's own words, in the book Crossing the Threshold of Hope, it says, the leader of the Catholic Church is defined by faith as a figure of Jesus Christ and is accepted as such by believers. The Pope is considered the man on earth who represents the Son of God, who takes the place of the second person of the omnipotent God of the Trinity. Have no fear, he says, when people call me the Vicar of Christ, when they say to me, Holy Father, or Your Holiness, or use titles similar to these which seem even inimical or in conflict to the gospel. This has not stopped Protestants like Billy Graham and one of the former heads of the Church of England, Lord Carey, to accept papal supremacy. And bishops like T.D. Jakes who are now dressing like Roman Catholic cardinals and are now part of the movement to merge all the Protestant churches with Rome. Why is this? The late Avram Manhattan tells us why. Ecumenism, which from its very beginning, coupled with Protestantism, leftist political bent, resulted in the enfeeblement of the major Protestant bodies. So we see that the Jesuits are working with the Protestants to weaken the Protestant churches, and this was done through the power very recently confirmed by a Jesuit in Vatican II. Vatican II was opened by Pope John the 23rd, and he gave it the instructions to Jesuit Cardinal Augustine Bea. And we're seeing in Vatican II the attire of the bishops is in this papal mitre from ancient Babylon. But what we are now seeing, that Protestant churches are now adopting the attire of the papacy, which shows that the Jesuits' work and agenda of infiltration and conquering Protestant churches has almost come to completion.
And on that note, let me quote something from Revelation 18:4. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye not receive her plagues. Okay, I got about 8 minutes left, and since we're on the subject of war and the Jesuits, I thought I would play something. It's called The Rise of ISIS, Explained in 6 Minutes. Now, you're going to see a genius plan put together. You're not going to hear anything about the Jesuits. They work behind the scenes. But if you think this is all coincidence, it just does not make sense to say that when you see that the plan of ISIS started way, way back, and it can probably go back to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So you know the Soviets the Americans are working together. Just as every other large country controlled by the Jesuits, they're playing everybody as puppets. And these leaders nowadays have their role in creating this one world order, one world religion that they're moving towards as we speak. Now, if you look at the genius of Lorenzo Ricci, the Jesuit general, who orchestrated and was behind the scenes creating the Revolutionary War, and how genius it was to pit England against France and the colonists, and all of these, it was like a chess match, and he put it all together. One of the masterminds to open up this country so that the Vatican and the Jesuits could get in and take it over the years. And there's a real similarity between the way the Vatican and the Jesuits have taken over our government and what they're doing now with Islam, their little baby creation. Islam does the same thing when they go into countries. Oh, they do it in a more ruthless manner. They do it completely opposite. See, here we have this guise of freedom, and the takeover takes place. But in these Islamic countries, they're very outspoken. You have no rights whatsoever. If you don't follow us, we'll cut your head off. So you have the two opposites working. The similarities, though, of these organizations of Catholicism and Islam is unmistakable. But I think it's good to look at the 6-minute clip here, and you'll see how they really do create ISIS. I think I have time. Well, maybe I'll get 5 minutes of it. This is what you hear, this is how they do it, how they put all the chess pieces together. At least close. It's close.
The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria is a phenomenon so terrible and shocking it seems impossible. It controls an area the size of the United Kingdom, commits mass atrocities, and launches terror attacks abroad. But to understand ISIS, it helps to tell the story of its rise. That story begins far away and many years before the group existed. In 1979, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan to defend a puppet dictator against rebels. Young men from the Middle East flock in to join the rebels. Many see it as a religious struggle, and some develop extremist views. Among them is a well-educated young Saudi named Osama bin Laden. Also in Afghanistan is a semi-literate former street thug from Jordan who calls himself Abu Musab al-Zawqawi. They do not get along and never will, but will create the groups we today know as Al-Qaeda and as ISIS. The Soviets withdraw in 1989, and the Arab fighters eventually go home. Bin Laden grows Al-Qaeda into a global network to continue the struggle against Islam's enemies. Zarqawi forms his own group, but it fizzles. Both men later returned to Afghanistan, now ruled by the Taliban. On September 11, 2001, Al-Qaeda attacks America from its base there. The U.S. invades Afghanistan. Bin Laden flees to Pakistan. Zarqawi, still obscure, flees to a remote and lawless corner of Iraq. 2 years later, the U.S. does something that will transform the Middle East and set the stage for ISIS.
My fellow citizens, the dangers to our country and the world will be overcome.
The Americans topple Saddam Hussein's secular, mostly Sunni dictatorship, and it disbands the Iraqi army. Thousands of Sunni Iraqi soldiers, angry and unemployed, join the insurgency. Jihadist groups, who are also Sunni, see this as a repeat of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and again they flood in to fight. Zarqawi is among them. Zarqawi's group eventually becomes Iraq's most ruthless. He especially attacks Shia, deliberately sparking a Sunni-Shia civil war. By 2004, Zarqawi is a jihadist superstar. Al-Qaeda, isolated and weakened, attempts to bolster its image by forming an alliance with Zarqawi's group, which becomes known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq. But in 2006, Iraq Sunnis rise up against Zarqawi, and the U.S. kills it in an airstrike. Over the next few years, Al-Qaeda in Iraq is largely defeated. The Americans withdraw in 2011 from an Iraq that finally looks stable. 2011, the Arab Spring spreads across the Middle East. In Syria, dictator Bashar al-Assad cracks down violently on protesters. They eventually fire back, leading to a civil war. Assad fears the world will intervene against him, so he releases jihadists in large numbers from Syrian prisons, tinging the rebels with extremism and making it harder for foreigners to back them. Back in Iraq, what little remains of Zarqawi's group is still allied with Al-Qaeda, but now known as the Islamic State in Iraq. It's led by a bookish religious scholar who calls himself Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. In 2012, Baghdadi sends a top deputy to Syria to start a new Al-Qaeda branch to fight alongside the rebels, Jabhat al-Nusra. Baghdadi attacks a series of prisons in Iraq, frees former jihadists, and recruits new ones, growing stronger. In April 2013, Baghdadi announces he is taking control of all Al-Qaeda allied forces in Syria and Iraq. His group expands into Syria, becoming the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. But Al-Qaeda rejects Baghdadi's power grab, and in 2014 formally exiles him. The two jihadist groups, long at odds, are now at war. ISIS grows powerful in Syria, in part because Assad tolerates its rise, which he does because it divides his enemies within Syria, and because foreign powers are too focused on ISIS now to worry about Assad. By June 2014, ISIS has built an army in Syria, and it launches a military-style invasion into Iraq. The Iraqi army, weakened by corruption, folds with little fight, and many Sunnis are tired of their Shia-dominated and increasingly authoritarian government, and welcome, or at least tolerate, ISIS's arrival. Within days, ISIS controls a third of Iraq and a big part of Syria.
Okay, I'm going to cut it off there. I think you get the gist of what I'm saying. So, they put a lot of effort into all of this stuff, and it doesn't look to me like a coincidence. It looks orchestrated, and it looks like all the leaders really are working together. Okay, we'll be back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal. Have a good evening, and see you tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.